begins with silence, not the kind you find in empty rooms or lonely fields, but a silence so heavy it feels as though the earth itself has conspired to keep a secret. In the archives of forgotten crimes, there lies a story that was never meant to be unearthed. A murderer, faceless and without trace, who walked the streets as though invisible. His crimes were so precise, so calculated, that when the dust settled, not even a single footprint remained. Hi everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel. Before this story pulls you in too deep, hit subscribe and tap the bell icon. Trust me, you'll want to be here when the past starts whispering. The case begins in a small town nearly a century ago, where cobblestone streets and gas lamps flickered against the shadows of night. People whispered about a man who could come and go without a sound, whose crimes were left carved into the flesh of memory but never into the ground beneath him. No dirt disturbed, no mud clung to boots, no sand shifted where he walked. For the investigators of that time, it was as though they were hunting a ghost. The first victim was found near an abandoned mill, a man in his 40s, strong-built, who had lived a quiet life as a blacksmith. His body lay twisted, but there were no signs of struggle around him. No trail leading in, no trail leading out, as if he had simply fallen from the sky, lifeless. The sheriff, confused and unsettled, wrote in his ledger, "Cause unknown, presence unseen, but the feeling of being watched lingers still." Whispers spread quickly. Some said it was the work of a vengeful spirit, others that the man had enemies who knew ancient ways of hiding. The town's older folk said something more chilling. The earth itself protects him. He doesn't leave footprints because he was never meant to be seen. But this was only the beginning. Each disappearance that followed grew anger, as though the killer was feeding on the fear itself. The town began locking its doors not at midnight, but at dusk, because by then, the shadow had already chosen. And the strangest part, every victim's eyes were open, staring, yet no reflection of terror was found in their gaze, almost as if they hadn't even seen him coming. As investigators tried to piece together the first killing, the second one arrived like a thunderclap. A woman, young, unmarried, and known for her laughter that carried across the marketplace, was discovered lifeless in her own home. No broken lock, no shattered window. The door still bolted from the inside, yet she was gone. Her body was found lying on the floorboards near her bed, untouched except for a thin mark across her throat, so faint it seemed almost drawn with a pencil. The scene sent chills down the spines of men hardened by war and women who had seen death before. But again, no footprints, not inside the room, not on the dirt outside the home. It was as though the murderer had stepped in from nowhere, taken a life, and vanished back into nothing. A coroner's note survives, yellowed and fragile with time. This wound is precise, measured. The hand that delivered it does not tremble. Yet the absence of trace is more frightening than the wound itself. Theories began to fracture the town like cracks in ice. Some swore the killer knew the art of walking on wooden stilts, leaving no evidence behind. Others whispered darker things, that he was never human to begin with. Priests spoke of angels cast down from heaven, cursed to walk among mortals unseen. Farmers muttered about devils who marked families one by one until their lineage was erased. But fear has a way of clouding logic. Behind closed doors, neighbors stopped trusting each other. Friends became suspects. A new silence grew, colder than the first, Windows shuttered, streets emptied. The murderer was not just taking lives, he was stripping away the very heartbeat of the town. And still, investigators tried to hunt him. They tested every theory, dusting for prints, measuring boot sizes, even sprinkling flour across thresholds to catch his step. Yet every time, the results mocked them. Nothing. Clean unto wicked. One sheriff wrote in frustration, "The devil himself must be mocking me. Either he floats above the ground, or the ground swallows him whole." The legend deepened, and with it the mystery. Victims were never robbed, no valuables stolen, no signs of passion or anger, just silence, a wound, and eyes staring wide open into nothing. And the town began to realize something more terrifying. It wasn't random. The murderer was choosing. But no one yet understood why. By the third killing, panic was no longer a whisper, but a scream buried beneath clenched jaws. This time, it was a schoolteacher, well-liked and respected, found in the middle of the churchyard. His body was discovered at dawn, lying face up among the gravestones, hands folded neatly across his chest, as though someone had staged him for burial. Again, the earth offered no answers. No soil disturbed, no tracks in the dew, not even the bent blades of grass where his body had been laid. The townsfolk gathered around in silence, staring not only at the corpse, but at the impossibility of its placement. Whoever had done this had carried him through consecrated ground without leaving a trace. The church bells rang that morning, not for service, but for alarm. And in their ringing, people began to murmur a new theory. The killer was not one of them. He was something beyond. The one who walks without shadow. Some called him. Others refused to even name him, for fear the very act of speaking might summon his attention. But there was a clue, faint though it was. The teacher's pockets contained a note, written in his own hand the night before. "I feel I am being followed, though I hear nothing. When I turn, the street is empty, but the sense grows heavier. Whoever he is, he waits." This single scrap of paper gave the investigators more to work with than anything before. But it also deepened the terror. If the teacher had felt the presence, then perhaps others had as well. Perhaps many had felt eyes upon them in the dark, but had brushed it off as paranoia. The townspeople, desperate for protection, tried old rituals, salt across doorways, iron nails driven into thresholds, prayers whispered louder than the ticking of clocks. Yet the murders continued, as silent as before, as though mocking every attempt to hold them back. And always, it was the same. No theft, no struggle, just the body, placed with eerie precision. By now, investigators had begun to suspect a pattern. The victims all shared something, though what, exactly, was still hidden. A blacksmith, a young woman, a teacher. Ordinary lives, but perhaps not ordinary pasts. The sheriff confided in his final surviving notebook. He takes only those the town remembers. He leaves nothing but their absence. Perhaps he is erasing history, one person at a time. The fear shifted into something new. Not only would no one be safe, but no one would be remembered. By the time the fourth victim was found, the town was unraveling. Entire families packed their belongings and fled under cover of night, abandoning generations of roots. Those who remained spoke little, their voices hushed even in daylight, as if sound itself might attract the invisible predator. The fourth body belonged to a traveling merchant who had passed through town many times before. He was known for his sharp wit, his tendency to tell stories of faraway cities, and the small silver watch he carried everywhere. His corpse was discovered just outside the old bridge, laid across the stones, arms stretched wide, as though in some forgotten ritual. The watch remained in his pocket, untouched, ticking faintly when found. No footprints marked the bridge. Not his, not anyone else's. Investigators marveled at how his body could be placed so precisely without disturbing the dust that clung to the old stones. One deputy wrote, "Even the air feels untouched, as if time itself had been carved open and resealed." But something about this killing was different. The merchant had no ties to the town. He wasn't born there. He didn't live there. He merely passed through, which meant the murderer was no longer bound by familiarity or history. The selection was widening, spreading like a stain. Anyone, it seemed, could be chosen, and that terrified everyone. The church tried to offer explanations, declaring the killer an agent of punishment sent to cleanse the wicked. But this theory faltered quickly. None of the victims shared sins greater than any other. The blacksmith was devout, the young woman kind, the teacher respected, the merchant charitable. If punishment was the motive, it was unjust, chaotic, and cruel. The sheriff, worn and sleepless, began to speak in riddles to his deputies, muttering things about footprints that existed but could not be seen. Paths walked not by flesh but by memory. He scribbled in the margins of his logbook. What if he does not walk where we walk? What if he walks somewhere parallel, yet close enough to reach through? This idea unsettled his men more than the crimes themselves. For if true, the killer was not bound by the same laws of earth and matter. He could appear anywhere, vanish at will, and claim a life without so much as disturbing the dust beneath him. And for the first time, the sheriff admitted out loud what many had already feared in silence. "We are not chasing a man. We are chasing something else." The town was shrinking, not just in numbers, but in spirit. By the fifth killing, silence had become the language of survival. Children were no longer allowed outdoors. Shops closed before dusk, and the tavern, once filled with laughter, now sat empty, chairs stacked against the walls as though preparing for an unseen storm. The victim this time was unlike the others. He was no ordinary worker or passing traveler. He was a deputy, the very man tasked with investigating the murders. His colleagues found him seated upright at his desk in the sheriff's office, head bowed as though in prayer. Papers lay scattered around him, but no struggle had taken place. His revolver remained at his side. No footprints led to his desk. No sound had woken the other deputies who claimed to have been just down the hall. It was as though the killer had materialized beside him, claimed him, and vanished before breath could stir the dust. But one detail set this murder apart. On the deputy's desk, in the margin of his notes, was a single word scribbled hastily before death. Erased. This one word fanned the flames of theories like dry leaves in wind. What if the killer was not only removing lives, but erasing the memory of them? Already, townsfolk struggled to recall certain details about the victims. The blacksmith's forge, once noisy, now seemed abandoned for years. The teacher's schoolhouse felt colder, as if no lessons had been taught within. The young woman's laughter faded from memory, as though it had never been heard. Even the sheriff confessed privately to his journal. I can no longer remember the face of my own deputy. His name slips my tongue, though I buried him this very day. This realization broke the town spirit. To lose a life was one thing, but to lose the very memory of it was worse. The townspeople began to question their own minds, doubting whether the past they remembered had ever truly existed. Families clutched photographs, tracing the outlines of faces, terrified they too would fade. But photographs themselves began to betray them. In several homes, pictures once showing victims now appeared blurred, smudged, or faint, like the image itself recoiled from being seen. The killer, it seemed, was not content with taking lives. He was consuming remembrance itself, rewriting reality so that the victims had never walked the earth at all. And if that was true, then even those left behind were already slipping into a silence deeper than death. By now the town was a hollow shell. Where once children played and merchants bargained, there remained only silence, punctuated by the tolling of bells that rang for no one. Families boarded up their homes with iron nails and heavy wood, but deep down, they knew it was useless. Doors and walls stopped men, not shadows. The sixth victim was an elderly woman, one of the last storytellers of the town. She carried with her tales of the founding days, of struggles against famine, of births and marriages, of sins long buried. To many, she was the memory of the place, and perhaps that is why she was chosen. Her body was discovered in the church itself, slumped over in the front pew. No marks scarred her skin. No signs of struggle disturbed her gown. She looked merely asleep, head tilted gently to the side. Yet when they tried to recall her voice, her stories, her face, the memory faltered. Even her family, weeping by her body, admitted that they could no longer remember the sound of her words. The priest who found her left a chilling entry in the church records. She is gone, and yet she was gone before I found her. My memory betrays me, as though she never was. And so the town began to understand. The killer was not simply erasing lives. He was erasing the very threads of history. The blacksmith's forge cold, the teacher's schoolhouse silent, the deputy's desk abandoned, the merchant's laughter silenced, the woman's story swallowed. Each death stripped away not only flesh but legacy. Rumors spread that the murderer was not a man, but an embodiment of forgetting itself. Some force older than time, feeding on memory like a predator feeds on blood. For what is a town without memory? Nothing but stones and dust. The sheriff, now gaunt and half mad, confessed to his deputies that he could no longer remember his own parents' faces. He stared at the portrait on his wall and saw only blurred figures. "He will not stop," the sheriff said. "He will erase until there is nothing left. Not us, not this town, not even the name of it." And perhaps the most terrifying thought, what if the world beyond this small town had already been touched? What if countless others had already vanished, their stories erased, their names swallowed whole, leaving us unaware they had ever lived? The silence was no longer local. It was endless. By the seventh death, there was almost no town left to witness it. Homes stood abandoned, windows cracked, shutters swaying with the wind. What had once been a living community was now a graveyard of empty streets, where every echo felt like a whisper from the past. The last victim was the sheriff himself. He had become the lone sentinel, refusing to leave, determined to document every detail until the end. His journals grew frantic, pages filled with crossed-out words, fragmented sentences, and sketches of footprints that fade even as he drew them. In his final entry he wrote, "He walks among us unseen. He takes not the body but the remembrance. If this is my final word, let it be known. I no longer trust even my own memories." When the deputies found him, he was seated at his desk, head resting upon his arm, as though he had simply fallen asleep while writing. But his journal lay open before him, the ink still wet on a line that trailed into nothing, as if his hand had been stopped mid-word. And here lies the strangest truth. In the years that followed, the town itself seemed to fade. Maps no longer marked its place. Letters referencing it dissolved into confusion, as if no such town had ever existed. Even in government records, its name blurred into obscurity, replaced with blank space or smudged ink. Travelers who once swore they had passed through it could no longer remember the streets or faces. All that remained were fragments, a rusted pocket watch, a weathered gravestone with no name, a church bell that tolled in the wind, though no church stood nearby. The legend of the murderer who left no footprints survives only in whispers, stories told in dimly lit taverns or written in half-burnt journals discovered in forgotten attics. Some dismiss it as folklore, a fable to frighten children, but others wonder if it was more. Because if memory can be said so completely, if lives and even entire towns can vanish without leaving a trace, then what else has already been lost? What faces have been swallowed by silence? What stories never told because they were never allowed to survive? Perhaps, even now, as you listen to this tale, something is watching. Something that does not walk on earth, but across the shadows of history itself. And if you ever feel that chill at your back, the sense of being followed, though no one is there, perhaps you've already been chosen.